Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. And our first story of the day is by Army Jeep Guy. Try to save money? Try again. This was more than a few years ago when I worked for a lowball medical home health company. I was hired as a respiratory therapist and had an area to cover roughly 150 miles out from the office. The company had issues with managers because of the lost money and always had turnover. So my job was to set up breathing treatment machines, but the most common thing was checking on oxygen concentrators in patients' homes. At the time, I would make $25 a visit plus mileage, so you try and group the patients and hit 3 or 4 at a shot. Every month, a patient had to be checked, and the check lasted about 15 minutes, just a fast check. So one day we get a new manager that was really all about saving money and getting the company back on track. He started to streamline departments and all I could hear was things were not done by the book. So he called me into the office one day, I worked from home mostly, and had a talk. That the cost of driving everywhere was too high for the amount of patients I had, and could we do something about it? I explained that there was no other way of doing my job than how I was doing it. So he came up with the idea of a phone visit. I explained I really can't do that because I couldn't see the equipment, and he countered with, the drivers see the machines every week and can just spot to see if they were working. So he made up a worksheet to check off things I usually look for. Hours of use, clean filters, clean machine, hoses okay and not needing repair, total of 10 questions. He proceeded to say I can call and have the patients give me hours and ask the questions and bill it under a visit, which I can't do because the code isn't right. So he looks up all our codes for me and picks phone consult and tells me to bill under that. To cover my butt, I ask for a letter stating this and he gives it to me the next day. Cue malicious compliance. I got all my patients' numbers toward at the end of the month and worked through the list and got 34 done in about 4 hours and decided that was enough to make a point. At this time, I complete my paperwork and send it to corporate with a letter from my boss telling me to bill under that type of code. A week later, I get a check for $4,250 since that phone visit was a $125 per consult, mainly used for ventilators. Not bad for a part-time job, so the next week I do a few more patients and submit my pay. The following week, I get a call from corporate asking why I was getting paid more than full-timers in executive posts. I explained everything and forwarded all the documentation to them. A week later, the manager was at his desk when a fleet of cars pulled in and in walked HR from main office and fired him. So let me ask you guys, if you're in any kind of a managerial position and you come up with an idea that kind of shifts the course of action for the people working beneath you, and when you go ahead and put that into action, they ask you to put that in writing, would that make you reconsider what's possibly wrong with this? Kind of like what OP's manager should have done? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Ganja But Weed, how I forced the port to update their permitting system. So a while back, I had to submit a dive permit for some work we were doing down the port. I have a good working relationship with the safety officer there that handles all these. She had gone on her yearly leave, so permits had to be lodged with another safety rep who was well known to be difficult. Anyway, emailed off the permit to him. About an hour later, I received a very angrily worded email from the guy handling permits, which explained my permit was denied as the permit clearly states that all permits must be faxed and must include our safety plan. I replied that email was the method preferred by their office and that they had requested that we don't attach the safety plans anymore as we now have a formal meeting to audit our safety plans and that it was double handling. He replied with, I don't give a freak, permit clearly states, this permit is denied, submit a fresh permit. Now the diving safety plan we use for Portworx is a simplified version of our internal diving safety plan, which covers pretty much every eventuality. The version that we give to clients is about 10 pages. The full version is about 700. I filled out the permit, pulled a paper version of the safety plan, and loaded it into our flash printer/copier/fax unit and hit send. My boss raised an eyebrow and asked what I was doing. Explained I was fixing our permitting issue. We found out after a few angry phone calls from the port that the port had one of those old-style spool faxes, which are quite slow. They had tried to disconnect the transmission, but our machine was set to automatically resubmit, and I lied and told them I didn't know how to turn it off. Anyway, the result of that was the guy was taken off permits, and when the good safety officer got back, she had to update all their permits. She thought it was incredibly funny, as she said everyone in the office would have run-ins with him on everything. I feel like you gotta know you're a jerk if something negative happens that affects the entire office, and they actually still derive joy from that just because you are at fault. Also, I love that little exchange there where the boss is like, "OP, what are you doing?" And I imagine OP looks over with a smile and says, "I'm fixing our permitting issue." Maybe the boss lets out a sigh, takes a sip of their coffee, goes back to work reluctantly. This next story is by Positive Character 98. Professor and Grandma take one for the team. Paul the professor came to my university to his first tenure track position, and part of his duties was to lecture a course. In order to prevent meaninglessly easy courses, the university had a rule: for any course with more than 20 students, the average grade could not be higher than 90. Paul teaches his course for the first time, grades homework, and writes the test, aiming for an average of around 85. Apparently, he either underestimated his students' or teaching abilities, or overestimated how hard the test was, because the final average was well above 90. Now, Paul didn't want to start docking twice as much points for a given mistake to students because of his mistake, and he sure didn't want to have a situation where someone else deducts points by some random logic. Paul then thought about the students that didn't finish the course and how that would have reduced the average, and realized there was nothing stopping him from enrolling in the course. He enrolled himself into his own course in the online system, even though the final was already over, gave himself a 0, and saw the average go down by a few points. However, the average was still above 90, so he talked to his grandmother, who has nothing to do with the university, and signed her up for the course as well. Of course, since Granny didn't submit any of the homework or didn't take the test, he had no choice but to give her a failing grade, bringing the class average below 90. How sick can this man possibly be? Failing his own grandmother. I'm just surprised that somehow, in this university, you could sign up as late as when finals are going on? Is that a thing and I just wasn't aware of it? As far as I know, you have to sign up for universities of any kind within a certain window of time pretty early into the year. And also, why have any kind of artificial difficulty? Does it actually look bad if you have kids doing really good in these classes? This next story is by Long Suffering Squid. Red ones go faster. This story is a personal favorite because it's one of the rare times my team has not been blamed for other people's errors, even if we did have to clean them up. I had the pleasure of watching a coworker enact this malicious compliance. Conversations are written as well as they can be remembered. So, the orders at my job are coded by color. The color of the box the order is in indicates the type of order. Importantly, green boxes indicate a rush job and red boxes indicate a super rush job. Due to pressures from the demic and normal wear and tear, we're running short of green and red boxes. Under normal circumstances, the person that's responsible for ordering these supplies would go to the boss and get verbal permission to order more. Being the proactive sort, our supplies guy goes to the boss months before this becomes a problem. Surprisingly, our new boss denies the request. The conversation goes something like this. The supply guy goes, "We need more expedite boxes. Can I order some?" The boss says, "Do we have a problem?" Supply guy says, "Well, no, not yet, but we will in a few months." The boss says, "Don't worry about it then. We'll deal with it when it comes up." Supply guy says, "But," and the boss interrupting says, "Go back to work. I'll handle it when it becomes a problem." Supply guy shrugs and goes back to work, knowing that it's not his problem anymore. A few months later, finds boss in a panic as to why there aren't enough green and red boxes. Orders that should be rushed aren't going out on time. Boss then goes to supply guy. The boss says, "Why aren't we getting our orders out on time?" Supply guy says, "We don't have enough expedite boxes for the orders we're getting in." The boss says, "Why didn't you order them?" Supply guy shrugs. "He told me not to until it became a problem." Boss says, "We'll order some then." Supply guy says, "Okay, but they'll take a couple weeks to get here." Boss says, "What? Why? Can't we get them any quicker?" Supply guy says, "Sure, if you want to pay extra. It'll still be about a week probably." Boss says, "Fine, but you'll have to come up with a workaround until they get here. This is your fault." Supply guy does in fact come up with a workaround. Cue malicious compliance part 2. Without going into minutia, supply guy comes up with a method that will keep the customers as happy as possible under the circumstances. However, this means longer hours for the team and thus more overtime paid out. Bosses are unhappy with boss over the extra money spent on the overtime and the rush box order. Supply guy can't really be gotten in trouble due to both his seniority and capability and the fact that making sure the team is properly supplied is not technically part of his responsibilities. He was also not terribly unhappy about the overtime. Supply guy's hourly, while boss, who also had to work overtime, is salaried. All I gotta say is bless the people in this world like Supply Guy that are super proactive in these environments and make sure that you don't have any issues come up. It makes me think about those stereotypical relationships you hear about where the guy gets broken up with and quickly realizes afterwards that the dishes don't magically get done and the laundry doesn't magically reappear. Somebody better than them is just being proactive and getting this stuff done. Our next story is by Artie Miss. Not enough, you say? This happened in the 2010s, however the backstory starts in 2005 when I got a lap band weight loss surgery. Things were kind of fine after surgery for a while. I had occasional complications, but nothing I couldn't deal with. Then somewhere around 5 years post-op, I had a major complication. I wound up in the ICU, in a coma for a bit, then in recovery, before finally being sent home. I think I spent about 3 weeks-ish in the hospital. Once I got home, the medical bills began to find their way to my mailbox. You see, when you're in critical condition within the best healthcare system in the world, this is sarcasm for those of you in the back, I hate that I have to point that out, you have access to the best doctors available. Also, each and every one of them is going to bill you for having set foot into your ICU room. This is probably where I should mention that I had no insurance. I paid for the initial surgery by financing it. I thought I was making myself healthier by getting weight loss surgery. Anyway, the malicious compliance comes as a result of these bills. I did the math once, without counting the 2 hospitals, the surgeon's office, and 1 lab. I was making payments to 21 other doctors who had consulted on my condition while in the ICU. These bills ranged from $60 to thousands of dollars, Murica. All told, I was close to $350,000 in debt. I knew this wasn't sustainable. I looked into bankruptcy, but in the meantime, I wanted to make a gesture to the doctors whom I owed money, so I sent each one $10 a month. $210 a month for those who are counting. One day, I opened a medical bill and there was a handwritten sticky note on the bill. It essentially said, "We appreciate your payments, but $10 a month is not enough." Now, I'm certain that the person who wrote this note had absolutely no idea about my financial position at this time and was just doing his or her job, but I was angry. I was angry for trying to help myself become healthier and making my life worse. I was angry for the crippling debt I had put myself in, and I was angry because it would have been cheaper had I just died. I wanted to call this person who had penned this sticky note and unload all of this anger, but alas, he or she was just doing their job. I wrote a check for $11 instead of the $10 I had been sending. I kept sending payments to all of the doctors until it interfered with the bankruptcy case I filed, but I also never got another sticky note from that office. Honestly, considering the amount of people in good old America that has medical debt and just don't pay it, the fact that OP was making $10 good faith payments to these people shouldn't have been overlooked by them, and in the professional world, I don't think there's any reason why they should have gotten that sticky note. There's no contract that they have to send a certain amount. They're contributing towards the debt, let alone how unprofessional it comes across even sending that note to begin with. And our final story of the day is by Single Dad to One, Get Rid of That Ladder. Was just reading a post and it reminded me of a story my dad told me. He worked in a factory and they had gotten a new boss. The boss was walking through the section he was responsible for and saw a ladder leaning against some machinery. He told an employee to get rid of it. The employee tried to say something and the boss told him that he said to get rid of it and he didn't want to hear any excuses. The employee says okay and removed the ladder. Not long later, the line broke down. The boss was freaking out because it was his butt if it did not get restarted soon. He talked to the ladder employee and asked if he knew what was wrong. He said yes and explained what the problem was. The boss told him to fix it and he said he couldn't. The problem was on machinery near the roof and he didn't have a ladder. See, a good manager would probably start with, who put this ladder here and why is it here? Then you would get told a very clear reason as to why the ladder's there and why they need it there, and not just trample all over some poor workers who are just trying to get a job done. But with that being said, that's a wrap on another bunch of stories here today. As always, if you guys have any favorite videos of this bunch, let me know which one in the comments down below and why. And if you enjoyed the stories in general, if you could subscribe to this channel, it'd mean a lot to me. I make these videos daily, and it's by far and away the best way to support my channel. So no matter what you did, whether it was subscribing or liking, leaving a comment, I just appreciate the heck out of you guys. And as always, I'll be back tomorrow with even more stories right here on the Storytime channel.